Is he gonna make it, nurse?
Tell me the truth.
We're doing everything we can. His condition is still critical.
Stand down, nurse. That's an order. The room went still. Monitors continued their steady rhythm. A ventilator pushed air with mechanical patience. Outside the trauma bay doors, boots struck tile in sharp, impatient bursts. The colonel didn't lower his voice. "You are relieved." The nurse didn't move. She stood at the head of the bed, gloved hands steady against the patient's shoulders. Her posture was straight, almost formal. No shaking. No visible fear. The injured man on the gurney wore captain's bars, half torn from his uniform. Blood had dried into the fabric at his side. His dog tags rested against skin gone gray. "I'm not finished," she said quietly. It wasn't defiance in her tone. It was certainty. Colonel Harris stepped closer. His shadow swallowed the overhead light. Combat patch on his sleeve. Ranger tab above it. A chest full of ribbons that told a long, decorated story. "You will step away from that officer," he said. "Now." Two junior nurses hesitated near the wall. A surgical resident froze mid-note. The tension was physical, thick enough to press against the lungs. The nurse at the bed adjusted the 4 rate without looking at the colonel. "He's unstable," she replied. "Moving him now increases the risk of cardiac arrest." "You don't get to make that call." Her eyes lifted then. Calm. Unblinking. "With respect, sir," she said, "I already did." The words landed like a slap. Harris turned slightly, ensuring everyone in the room could hear what came next. "You are a nurse. I am the commanding officer of this facility. You will not override me in my own trauma unit." A ripple moved through the staff. Outside, more boots. Security detail. Someone had called up the chain. The nurse checked the captain's pulse manually, ignoring the digital readout. 2 fingers pressed at his neck. Counting. "He was hypotensive on arrival," she said. "He lost over a liter in the field. If you move him before stabilization, you'll lose him. You're not cleared for transport decisions." "I don't need clearance to prevent a fatal mistake." The colonel's jaw tightened. "You're out of line." Silence stretched. A helicopter thudded faintly in the distance. No one commented on it. The trauma bay doors pushed open harder this time. A major stepped in, eyes sharp, voice already raised. "Sir, the situation outside, not now." The major hesitated, then glanced at the nurse. Something unreadable passed across his face. The captain on the bed coughed weakly. A thin thread of blood touched the corner of his mouth. The heart monitor spiked. The nurse reacted instantly. "Pressure dropping," she said. "Get me another unit." One of the junior nurses moved, then stopped as the colonel barked, "No one touches that patient without my authorization." The words froze the room. The nurse didn't look at him this time. "Hang the blood," she told the junior nurse. The bag was already in her hands. "Did you not hear me?" Harris thundered. "I did." The junior nurse's hands trembled. The colonel stepped forward and physically grabbed the 4 line before it could be connected. "That is an unlawful override of command authority," he said coldly. "I can have you removed from this hospital in 5 minutes." The nurse's expression didn't change. "Sir," she said, softer now, "if you delay transfusion for a transport that should never happen, you will have a body instead of a briefing." The words were precise. Controlled. Not emotional. That made them worse. The colonel leaned close enough that only she could hear the next sentence. "You have no idea who is waiting on that transfer." A pause. "Neither do you," she replied. The helicopter noise grew louder. "Close now." Heavy rotors slicing air. Several staff members exchanged uneasy glances. "We are inside a secure military medical facility," the colonel said sharply. "There is no clearance for." The building vibrated slightly. Glass trembled in its frame. The major stepped forward again, urgency breaking through discipline. "Sir, we have an inbound aircraft requesting rooftop access." "Unscheduled." "Denied." "They're not asking." The colonel stared at him. "Identify the aircraft." The major swallowed. "Call sign confirms executive priority." A silence deeper than the previous one settled into the room. The nurse's hands never stopped moving. She adjusted oxygen. Rechecked the captain's pupils. Issued another quiet instruction for labs. The colonel's gaze shifted to her again. "You initiated this," he demanded. She didn't answer. Instead, she finally looked directly at him. Not with anger. Not with triumph. With something closer to disappointment. "Sir," she said, voice level, "your focus right now should be on the man bleeding in front of you." The doors at the end of the corridor burst open. Black suits. Earpieces. Precision. Secret Service agents moved with silent efficiency past stunned orderlies and rigid MPs. The hospital was part of Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. It had seen dignitaries before. But not like this. The helicopter's roar peaked overhead. The colonel's authority, so solid seconds ago, shifted, not broken yet, but strained. An agent stepped into the trauma bay doorway. "Who's in charge here?" Colonel Harris straightened immediately. "I am." The agent's eyes moved past him. They landed on the nurse at the head of the bed. For a fraction of a second, recognition flashed. "Respect." "Ma'am," the agent said. The colonel noticed. "Excuse me," Harris snapped. "You will address the commanding officer. The aircraft from the White House has landed," the agent said evenly. "We need confirmation the patient is stable." The colonel's gaze snapped back to the nurse. "What have you done?" She secured the bloodline herself. This time, no one stopped her. The captain's pulse steadied slightly under her fingers. "Stabilizing," she said. "But not transport ready." The agent nodded once. "We'll wait." The words settled like a verdict. Colonel Harris's control of the room had evaporated in less than 30 seconds. He looked at the nurse again, really looked at her now. No insignia beyond standard medical rank. No decorations. Quiet. Composed. And somehow, the one person in the building the Secret Service had just deferred to. "You've overstepped," he said, but the force was gone. She met his eyes. "No, sir," she replied. Another tremor from the rooftop as engines powered down. Outside, boots repositioned. Radios whispered. Inside the trauma bay, the only steady sound was the monitor. Beep, beep, beep. And for the first time since he had entered the room, the colonel wasn't the one in control. The rotor wash faded into a low mechanical hum. No one in the trauma bay relaxed. Colonel Harris stepped back half a pace, recalibrating. His posture straightened, shoulders squared, chin lifted. The reflex of a man who had spent 30 years inside chain of command. "Major," he said quietly, without looking away from the nurse, "secure this corridor. No one in or out without my authorization." "Yes, sir." The order still carried weight. MPs moved instantly. The hallway cleared with disciplined precision. Even with black-suited agents present, the military structure reasserted itself in subtle lines, rank speaking to rank, posture answering posture. The nurse finished adjusting the transfusion and finally removed her gloves. She discarded them carefully, methodically. No wasted motion. An agent approached but stopped 2 feet short of her. Respectful distance. "Status, ma'am." "Responding to blood," she said. "Pressure's climbing, but he's fragile. Internal bleed hasn't been fully ruled out." Her tone was clinical. Controlled. The colonel watched the exchange. "Ma'am," he repeated, sharp enough for everyone to hear. The agent didn't correct himself. Instead, he asked, "Is surgical consult standing by?" The nurse nodded toward the observation window. "They're scrubbed." "I delayed transport because movement would have destabilized him." Harris exhaled through his nose. "You delayed a direct order." She finally turned toward him fully. "Sir, I delayed a preventable death." The words weren't raised. They didn't need to be. The captain on the bed shifted slightly, eyes fluttering. He wasn't fully conscious, but he was fighting. Harris stepped closer to the gurney now, examining the uniform more carefully. The name tape was partially torn. The combat patch marked a special operations unit. Recognition flickered. "Where was he picked up?" the colonel asked. "Forward extraction from a joint training site," the nurse replied. "Transported stateside under classified routing." "Classified," Harris repeated, glancing at the agents. The lead agent gave nothing away. This was not a field hospital overseas. This was not a combat support tent in desert heat. This was Bethesda. Climate-controlled. Polished floors. secure perimeters. Yet the atmosphere felt closer to deployment than peacetime. The nurse stepped to the side as the surgical team entered quietly, captain insignias on their collars, one lieutenant colonel overseeing. They acknowledged Harris first. "Sir." Then, after a brief pause, "Ma'am." Again. Harris caught it. The lieutenant colonel surgeon glanced at the chart on the monitor. "Transfusion initiated." "Yes," the nurse answered. "On whose authority?" Harris pressed. The surgeon didn't hesitate. "Medical necessity, sir." A subtle line had been drawn. Harris wasn't unfamiliar with pushback. Combat commanders often clashed with medical officers over risk tolerance. But this felt different. Less argumentative. More assured. The nurse stepped back just enough to give the surgeons access. Her scrubs were standard issue. Her name badge read simply, Lieutenant A. Carter. Nothing about it explained the rooftop helicopter. Nothing about it explained why Secret Service agents waited for her assessment instead of his command. Harris folded his hands behind his back. "Lieutenant," he said evenly, "how long have you been assigned to this facility?" 18 months, sir. Prior duty station. San Diego. At Naval Medical Center, San Diego. He recognized the cadence of Navy medical training in her voice. Calm under stress. Detached without being cold. "You transferred here under whose sponsorship?" he continued. "Standard reassignment through the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery." No hesitation. No embellishment. The agent near the door shifted slightly, as if the line of questioning had crossed into territory he didn't intend to defend, but wouldn't obstruct. Outside the bay, more black vehicles were visible through the narrow corridor windows. Unmarked. Idling. Harris looked past them to the skyline. The helicopter bore the familiar white and green paint scheme of Marine One. He felt the weight of that realization settle in his chest. Marine One did not land for routine briefings. It landed for the President of the United States. Or someone the President considered indispensable. He turned back to Lieutenant Carter. "You made a call that brought executive aviation to my rooftop." "No, sir," she said. "I made a call that brought additional oversight." "That's semantics. It's survival." The surgeon cleared his throat softly. "Sir, with respect, we need to move." Harris stepped aside, but he didn't leave. He watched how the staff deferred to her for micro-decisions, fluid adjustments, ventilator calibration, timing. She never raised her voice. She never asserted rank. Yet the room oriented itself around her presence. One of the junior nurses leaned toward another and whispered, "Is she attached to the Joint Chiefs or something?" The other shook her head quickly. "Keep your voice down." Hierarchy in a military hospital was precise. Commanding officer, deputy commander, department heads, senior enlisted advisors, lieutenants, especially nurses, did not override colonels in public trauma bays. And they certainly did not trigger rooftop landings. Harris stepped closer again, lowering his voice. "You're walking a dangerous line, Lieutenant." Her eyes met his. "I'm aware of my line, sir." "That's not what I meant." A pause. The captain's vitals stabilized incrementally. The transfusion was working. One of the agents spoke quietly into his earpiece, then nodded once. "They're asking for confirmation," he said. "Will he survive transfer if necessary?" The surgeon answered this time. "Not yet." The agent's gaze shifted to Carter again. She didn't look at him. She was watching the monitor. "Not yet," she repeated. Harris studied her profile. There was no arrogance in it. No visible triumph. Just discipline. The kind forged somewhere before Bethesda. Somewhere louder than this. Somewhere less forgiving. He realized something then, not fully formed, but unsettling. This wasn't about ego. It wasn't about defiance. She hadn't challenged him to embarrass him. She had challenged him because she was certain. Certain in a way that didn't come from textbooks. Certain in a way that felt operational. Outside, the agents adjusted their perimeter again. The building remained sealed. And inside the trauma bay at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, authority still wore a colonel's insignia. But control. That was becoming something else entirely. "Clear the bay." Colonel Harris didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The surgical team froze for half a second. The junior nurses exchanged glances. Even the agents near the doorway shifted subtly, recalculating the temperature in the room. "Sir," the lieutenant colonel surgeon began carefully. "We're mid-stabilization." I said, "Clear it," Harris repeated. "This is now a command review." The word review hung heavy. Not medical. Not procedural. Command. The nurse, Lieutenant Carter, didn't step back from the gurney. Her hands remained on the rail. "Sir," she said evenly, "he cannot be moved." "You are not being asked," Harris replied. Two MPs appeared at the door, uncertain but ready. The sight of them changed the atmosphere instantly. This wasn't disagreement anymore. It was enforcement. The heart monitor beeped, steady, fragile. Harris turned deliberately toward the agents. "For the record," he said, projecting now, "this officer's care falls under my authority as commanding officer of this installation. External interference will be documented." The lead agent didn't flinch. "We're not interfering with treatment. Your presence suggests otherwise." Carter's jaw tightened slightly. Not fear. Not panic. Restraint. Harris stepped directly in front of her, blocking her line of sight to the monitor. "You will step away from the patient," he said, voice low and precise. "Or I will have you escorted out of this room for insubordination." The junior nurse holding a fresh unit of blood swallowed visibly. Her knuckles whitened around the bag. Carter shifted half an inch to the side to see past him. "Sir, his pressure is dipping again." "That will be addressed by someone who understands their place in this chain." The words landed harder than shouting. Across the room, the surgical lieutenant colonel removed his glove slowly. Not in agreement. Not in protest. Just waiting. Harris turned toward the MPs. "Escort Lieutenant Carter to my office." Silence. The captain on the gurney coughed weakly. The monitor spiked, then dipped. Carter didn't move. The MPs hesitated. "Sir," one of them began carefully, eyes flicking to the agents. Harris's head snapped toward him. "Are you questioning my order, Sergeant?" "No, sir." "Then execute it." The sergeant stepped forward. Carter finally looked at him. "Give me 30 seconds, she said quietly. Not to Harris. To the sergeant. Harris cut in immediately. "You don't negotiate orders." The sergeant stopped again. The heart monitor alarm chirped short, warning bursts. Carter reached past the colonel and adjusted the vasopressor drip with practiced precision. Harris grabbed her wrist. Not violently, but firmly enough that everyone saw it. The room went still. "Stand down," he said. She met his eyes. For the first time, something flashed there. Not anger. Disappointment. "Sir," she said carefully, "if you remove me right now, you are choosing authority over outcome." A murmur shifted through the staff. Harris released her wrist slowly. "You mistake yourself for indispensable." "No, sir," she replied. "I understand timing." Outside the trauma bay, the corridor had filled. Word had spread fast. Officers from administration. Senior enlisted advisors. Medical staff pretending to check charts while watching through the glass. Public now. Harris turned toward the door and deliberately raised his voice just enough. "This lieutenant has overstepped command authority, initiated unauthorized contact beyond this facility, and compromised operational protocol." Eyes shifted to Carter. Whispers. Unauthorized contact. Compromised protocol. In a military hospital, those phrases carried weight. Carter didn't defend herself. She turned back to the patient and checked his pupils again. Harris followed her gaze. "Look at me when I'm addressing you." She did. "Yes, sir." "You will provide documentation of who you contacted and under what authority." "Yes, sir." "You will surrender your access badge pending review." A slight pause in the room. That was escalation. Badge suspension meant temporary removal from duty. Carter reached up calmly and unclipped the badge from her chest pocket. The faint plastic click echoed louder than it should have. She held it out. The sergeant took it reluctantly. The captain on the bed shifted again. Pressure dipped. The surgeon stepped forward despite himself. "Sir, with respect," Harris cut him off. "You are dismissed from this bay until I determine who remains on this case." The surgeon's jaw tightened. He didn't argue. He stepped back. The humiliation wasn't loud. It was procedural. Calculated. Carter glanced once toward the monitor, now partially obscured by Harris's shoulder. Her hands remained at her sides. No badge. No official standing. Just scrubs. "Sergeant," Harris said without looking at her, "escort the lieutenant to administrative holding." Administrative holding. Not arrest. But close enough to make the point. The sergeant stepped beside her. Carter moved. Not resisting. Not rushing. As she reached the doorway, the heart monitor alarm shifted tone longer this time. The surgeon looked instinctively at Carter. Harris noticed. "You will not look to her," he snapped. "You will look to me." Another alarm. The junior nurse holding the blood bag took a half step forward. Harris raised a hand sharply. "Stand fast." Carter stopped in the doorway. She didn't turn around. She didn't plead. She said one sentence. "If his pressure drops below 70 systolic, you have less than 4 minutes." Then she continued walking. The corridor parted as she stepped out. Officers watched. Enlisted watched. Agents watched. The sergeant walked half a step behind her, uncomfortable in a way that didn't show on his face, but showed in his posture. Inside the bay, the monitor dipped again. 72. 71. Harris stared at it. "Stabilize him," he ordered. The surgeon stepped forward carefully. "Sir, the vasopressor adjustment she initiated, I'll handle it." Harris moved to the 4 stand. He adjusted the rate. The monitor flickered. 70. 68. The alarm went continuous. In the corridor, Carter paused mid-step. She didn't turn, but her shoulders tightened slightly. Inside the trauma bay at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, authority was still intact. Rank was still visible. Orders were still being given. But control, it was slipping. And everyone could see it. The alarm didn't stop. It flattened into a sharp, unbroken tone that cut through the trauma bay like a blade. "Pressure 65, the surgical lieutenant colonel said evenly, but his hands were already moving faster. "He's crashing." Colonel Harris adjusted the vasopressor again. "Push fluids." "We are." The junior nurse's hands shook as she opened the line fully. In the corridor, Lieutenant Carter stood motionless. The sergeant beside her shifted his weight. "Ma'am," he muttered quietly, uncertain now. Inside the room, the monitor dipped again. 62. The surgeon glanced toward the doorway. Just once. Harris saw it. "You will focus on your patient," he snapped. "Yes, sir." But the hesitation had already infected the room. The lead Secret Service agent stepped one pace forward. "Colonel." Harris didn't turn. "Not now." "Colonel," the agent repeated, tone unchanged. That tone, controlled, unhurried, didn't match the urgency of the monitor's scream. Harris finally looked. The agent didn't argue. He didn't challenge rank. He simply asked, "Is the medical lead still present?" The wording was deliberate. Not commanding officer. Medical lead. Harris's jaw tightened. "She has been relieved pending review." A pause. The agent nodded once, as if confirming something only he understood. Understood. He stepped back. But he didn't leave. Inside the trauma bay, the surgeon leaned closer to Harris. "Sir, with respect, she initiated a stabilization sequence before we arrived. If we reverse it mid-cycle, I am aware of what she initiated." 60. The captain's skin had taken on a waxen sheen. The junior nurse's breathing was audible now. Short. Controlled. Outside, more movement in the corridor. Not rushed. Measured. 2 additional agents appeared, speaking quietly into concealed microphones. No raised voices. No visible panic. But their eyes kept drifting toward Carter. She hadn't tried to re-enter. Hadn't spoken. Hadn't protested. She stood at parade rest, hands loosely clasped behind her back. The sergeant holding her badge cleared his throat softly. "Ma'am, should I?" She shook her head once. "No." Back inside, the surgeon made a decision without announcing it. He adjusted the vasopressor back to its previous setting. Harris noticed immediately. "I did not authorize that." "No, sir." The monitor climbed. 63. 65. The room didn't relax, but the pitch of the alarm softened. Harris stared at the four-stand, then at the surgeon. Explain. It was calibrated to her timing. A beat. Her timing, Harris repeated. Yes, sir. The words weren't defiant. They were clinical. The difference mattered. In the hallway, a Navy commander in dress khakis arrived at a near jog, then slowed instantly when he saw the agents. He glanced at Carter. Recognition flickered. He straightened sharply. Not casual acknowledgement. Not familiarity. Recognition. Lieutenant, he said quietly. She gave the smallest nod. No conversation followed. The commander didn't approach her further. He moved instead toward the lead agent. They spoke in low voices. Harris noticed. The building felt different now. Not louder. Heavier. As if something invisible had entered the structure and settled into its bones. Inside the bay, the captain's pulse steadied marginally. 70. The surgeon exhaled through his nose. Stabilizing. Harris folded his hands behind his back again, regaining posture. Document that adjustment, he said sharply. Yes, sir. The junior nurse glanced toward the doorway again. Carter's eyes met hers briefly. No instruction. No reassurance. Just presence. The nurse's hands stopped trembling. Outside, the helicopter rotors had gone silent. That silence was worse. Engines off meant waiting. Waiting meant someone important enough to power down. An agent stepped aside as another figure entered the corridor, civilian attire, dark suit, no visible insignia. He carried no visible weapon. But everyone instinctively shifted when he passed. He didn't look at Harris. He didn't look at the staff. He looked at Carter. Held her gaze. A pause. Then a single, almost imperceptible nod. Carter didn't respond. The man continued past her toward the trauma bay doors, but stopped short of entering. He remained just outside the threshold. Harris saw him through the glass. Identify that civilian, he ordered quietly. One of the MPs spoke into his radio. No response came back immediately. That was unusual. Everything inside this facility had a record. Clearance levels. Badges. Logs. The MP tried again. Still nothing. The sergeant beside Carter shifted again. Ma'am, I've never seen that kind of access without. She didn't answer. Inside the trauma bay, the surgeon leaned close to Harris again. Sir, if we're keeping him here, we need imaging clearance immediately. You'll have it. And the external team. Harris hesitated. For the first time. The external team, he said carefully, will remain external. The agent near the doorway raised an eyebrow slightly at that phrasing. Not objection. Observation. Harris stepped toward the door and opened it halfway. This is a secured medical procedure, he announced to the corridor. No additional personnel will enter without my authorization. The civilian in the dark suit met his eyes calmly. He didn't argue. He simply said, understood, Colonel. Not sir. Colonel. The familiarity felt deliberate. Behind him, the Navy commander in khaki stood rigid, gaze fixed straight ahead. Harris felt it then. Not loss of control. Not yet. But something adjacent to it. The sense that multiple conversations were happening, none of them fully visible to him. Inside, the monitor continued its steady rhythm. 72. 74. The surgeon worked in silence. The junior nurse adjusted the drip exactly as Carter had said it earlier. No one acknowledged that. No one commented on it. But they followed it. In the corridor, the civilian in the suit checked his watch once. Then looked at Carter again. She remained still. Badge gone. Authority stripped, officially. Yet no one addressed her as anything less than before. No one dismissed her presence. The building hummed with restrained energy. Radios clicked. Booths shifted. Doors remained open just enough to see through. And in that narrow space between command and consequence, unease settled. Something was off. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just wrong in a way that disciplined people recognize before they can explain. Inside the trauma bay at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, rank still stood at the center. Orders were still issued. Reports were still logged. But attention kept drifting to the quiet nurse in the hallway. And no one could quite say why. The captain's vitals stabilized enough for imaging. 78 systolic, the surgeon said. Holding. Colonel Harris nodded once. Prep for CT, controlled movement. The gurney locks clicked open. Inside the corridor, agents repositioned without being asked. A clear path formed automatically, not by Harris's instruction, but by some silent coordination that had nothing to do with hospital protocol. The sergeant still held Carter's badge. He hadn't escorted her further. No one had reminded him to. The civilian in the dark suit checked his watch again, then glanced toward the rooftop access stairwell. Another agent approached him quietly. 2 minutes. The man gave a small nod. 2 minutes to what no one said. The trauma bay doors opened. The gurney rolled forward. Harris walked at its side, posture rigid, reclaiming visible control. Maintain spacing, he ordered. Medical staff followed in tight formation. As they passed Carter in the corridor, the captain's hand shifted weakly against the sheet. A small movement, but deliberate. His fingers turned slightly toward the sound of her breathing. Not toward Harris. Not toward the surgeon. Toward her. Carter didn't step forward. She didn't speak. But her shoulders straightened almost imperceptibly. The gurney rolled past. For half a second, the captain's eyelids fluttered. His lips moved. The surgeon leaned closer. What? The word was faint. Barely air. Lieutenant. The surgeon looked back at Carter instinctively. Harris noticed. He's disoriented, Harris said sharply. Focus. But the surgeon's eyes lingered a fraction too long. The civilian in the dark suit had heard it too. His expression didn't change, but his attention sharpened. The gurney reached the imaging corridor. Doors opened automatically. As the team prepared to transfer the captain to the CT table, one of the agents stepped forward, not to interfere, but to position himself where he could see Carter down the hall. He adjusted his earpiece. Confirm voice recognition, he murmured. Harris caught only the tone, not the words. Is there a problem? He demanded. No problem, Colonel. The calm was unnerving. Inside the imaging suite, the surgeon paused. Wait. Harris turned. What now? The surgeon looked at the 4 setup, then back toward the hallway. Sir, the dosage calibration. What about it? It's coded. Harris frowned. All our pumps are coded. No, sir. This one. He tapped the digital interface. There was a brief, almost invisible string of characters beneath the dosage line. Not standard hospital input. Encrypted. Harris stared at it. Who authorized this? The junior nurse swallowed. It was already programmed when she took over. The room went still again. Harris stepped closer to the pump. Remove it. The surgeon hesitated. Sir, if we clear it mid-infusion, remove it. The surgeon's hand hovered over the interface, then stopped. Because the civilian in the dark suit had stepped into the doorway. He didn't enter fully. He didn't raise his voice. Colonel, he said evenly, I would advise against altering that setting. Harris turned slowly. And on what authority would you be advising me? A pause. The man reached into his jacket, not quickly, not threateningly, and produced a small leather credential wallet. He didn't hand it over. He simply opened it far enough for Harris to see. No words. No explanation. Just a seal. Presidential. Harris's posture didn't collapse, but it shifted. Explain your involvement, Harris said. Monitoring, the man replied. Monitoring what? The outcome. Harris glanced back at the pump, then toward the hallway. Carter still stood exactly where she had been. Badgeless. Silent. Watching nothing in particular. Yet everything in the room seemed subtly aligned with decisions she had made minutes earlier. The surgeon lowered his hand from the interface. Leaving it, he said quietly. Harris didn't countermand him this time. The captain was transferred onto the CT table. As the machine began its slow rotation, the imaging technician looked uncertainly toward Harris. Sir, we have an external override on imaging priority. What? It's flagged at executive level. The scan's transmitting off-site in real time. Harris stared at him. That is not standard protocol. No, sir. The civilian in the doorway spoke again. It is today. The words were calm, unemotional. as if this were routine. Harris stepped out into the corridor abruptly. He walked directly toward Carter. The sergeant straightened, still holding her badge. "Lieutenant," Harris said quietly, close enough that only she and the nearby agents could hear. "Who are you attached to?" "Medical command, sir." "That's not what I'm asking." She met his eyes. There was no defiance there now, just steadiness. "I'm exactly where my orders placed me." "Whose orders?" A beat. She didn't answer. Not refusal, just silence. Behind Harris, the imaging machine hummed steadily. Inside the suite, the surgeon watched the monitors as scan slices appeared. His eyes widened slightly at something on the screen. He didn't speak yet. The civilian in the dark suit stepped closer to Carter, not intrusively, but with quiet familiarity. "Timing," he asked her softly. "Still critical," she replied. Harris heard it. He turned sharply. "You will address me when discussing a patient under my command." The civilian didn't look at him. He looked at Carter. Understood. The tone wasn't submission. It was acknowledgement. In the imaging room, the technician called out, "Active internal bleed confirmed." Contained, but unstable. The surgeon exhaled slowly. Her call was right. No one corrected him. Harris felt the shift then, not in authority on paper, but in gravity. The staff weren't looking at Carter because she was loud. They were looking because her decisions were holding. The encrypted dosage. The early transfusion. The transport delay. Each one aligning. Not lucky. Deliberate. The civilian in the dark suit glanced toward the stairwell leading to the rooftop. A distant door opened. Footsteps. Measured. Approaching. Harris followed the sound instinctively. Boots. But not military. Polished leather. Several sets. The agent near the stairwell straightened fully. "Stand by," he murmured into his mic. Harris looked back at Carter one more time. "You initiated something bigger than a medical judgment," he said quietly. She held his gaze. "I prevented a mistake." The footsteps grew louder. Closer. The audience in the hallway, officers, enlisted, staff, felt it before they understood it. This wasn't about a nurse challenging a colonel. It wasn't about ego. It was about proximity to something far above the hospital's chain of command. And as the footsteps reached the end of the corridor, it became clear. Lieutenant Carter was not ordinary. But whatever she was hadn't been revealed yet. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the corridor. Not rushed. Not announced. Stopped. Every conversation died mid-breath. Colonel Harris turned first. Two Secret Service agents stepped aside in perfect synchronization. Between them, the President of the United States. No introduction. No ceremony. Just presence. He didn't look at the colonel. He didn't look at the agents. He looked straight down the corridor, at Lieutenant Carter. And he walked toward her. The sound of polished shoes against tile was the only thing anyone heard. Harris snapped to attention. "Mr. President." The president lifted a hand slightly. Not dismissive. Not aggressive. Just enough. Harris stopped speaking. The corridor tightened. Officers straightened. Enlisted stiffened. Even the air felt disciplined. The president stopped in front of Carter. She did not salute. She did not speak. She stood at parade rest. The sergeant beside her still held her badge. The president looked at it. Then at the sergeant. "Return that," he said calmly. The sergeant didn't hesitate. He handed it back to Carter immediately. Harris felt the shift like a physical impact. "Mr. President," Harris began carefully, with respect, "this officer is under active command review for insubordination." The president turned his head slowly toward him. Insubordination. He let the word sit. Then he looked back at Carter. "You called?" "Yes, sir." Not loud. Not proud. "Yes, sir." The president studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Walk with me." He turned toward the imaging suite without waiting for permission from anyone. Carter moved beside him. Not behind. Beside. No one stopped her. No one spoke. Harris followed 2 steps back. Inside the CT room, the surgeon froze when he saw who had entered. "Mr. President." The president stepped to the monitor. He didn't pretend to understand the medical imagery. He looked at the surgeon. Will he live? If we operate immediately, yes, sir. Then do it. He turned his head slightly toward Carter. Your timing. Within 6 minutes, sir. The president nodded again. No questions. No debate. The surgeon began issuing rapid instructions. The team moved. Fast. Disciplined. Different now. Because the hierarchy had just shifted in a way no one could ignore. Harris stepped forward. Mr. President, I must insist that chain of command within this facility. The president faced him fully this time. You relieved her. Yes, sir. For doing her job. She overrode direct command authority. The president's expression didn't harden. It cooled. She exercised authority you don't have. Silence. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Harris felt every pair of eyes in the corridor turn toward him. With respect, sir, Harris said carefully, she is a lieutenant assigned to medical staff. The president looked toward the civilian in the dark suit. A small nod passed between them. The man stepped forward and spoke for the first time with clarity that carried. Lieutenant Amelia Carter is cross-designated under Executive Military Medical Authority Directive 7. The corridor absorbed the sentence slowly. Harris blinked. Directive 7. The civilian continued, calm and precise. Contingency authority activated in cases involving nationally critical personnel under classified status. Authority supersedes installation command for medical stabilization decisions. No one explained further. They didn't have to. The surgeon's hands paused for half a second, then moved faster. Harris stared at Carter. She hadn't changed posture, hadn't shifted expression. But the room had. The agents were no longer watching her out of curiosity. They were watching her because they had been assigned to. The Navy commander in khaki straightened further and gave her a crisp nod of acknowledgement. Not casual. Formal. Respectful. Harris swallowed. And the captain, he asked. The president answered directly. He saved my son's life 2 years ago. The words were simple. They hit harder than shouting. He is not just an officer under your roof, the president continued. He is national strategic continuity. The corridor understood. This wasn't favoritism. It was protocol at a level most of them never saw. Harris looked back at Carter. You had this authority the entire time. Yes, sir. You allowed me to relieve you. Yes, sir. Why? A pause. Not dramatic. Measured. Because arguing would have wasted time. The answer landed without emotion. No victory in it. No accusation. Just fact. Inside the imaging suite, alarms shifted as the team prepared to move the captain directly to surgery. The president stepped closer to Carter. You assessed correctly. Yes, sir. No hesitation. No, sir. He studied her for one more long second. Then, in full view of every officer, enlisted member, and agent in that corridor, the president extended his hand. Not for a salute. For a handshake. She took it. Firm. Professional. The corridor froze in that image. A lieutenant nurse. Shaking hands with the president. Not as ceremony. As acknowledgement. When he released her hand, he turned to Harris. Colonel. Yes, Mr. President. Your facility performed well. A beat. But you confused rank with authority. The words were controlled. Measured. Final. Harris held his posture. Yes, sir. The president looked back at Carter. Resume control of your patient. Yes, sir. She moved immediately. No glance toward Harris. No pause. Just motion. The surgeon stepped aside instinctively to let her pass first. Not because she outranked him. Because now everyone understood. She reached the gurney as they prepared to roll to surgery. She checked the 4-pump. Didn't adjust it. Didn't need to. She gave one quiet instruction. Maintain pressure above 80. No deviation. Yes, ma'am, the junior nurse replied automatically. No one corrected the title. Harris stood in the corridor as the surgical doors swung open and the team disappeared inside. The president remained for a moment longer. He looked at Harris. Respect is quiet, he said. But it is not optional. Then he turned and walked back down the corridor toward the rooftop stairwell. Agents followed. The civilian in the dark suit gave Carter one last nod before stepping away. Within seconds, the corridor returned to something resembling normal. But it wasn't the same. Not anymore. Harris remained standing where he was. The sergeant avoided his eyes. The Navy commander exhaled slowly. Through the surgical window, Carter could be seen assisting with preparation, calm, efficient, unchanged. Her badge clipped back onto her chest. Rank exactly what it had always been. Lieutenant. But now no one in that building would ever mistake her. The helicopter lifted off 23 minutes later. No one watched it from the rooftop. They heard it. The low thud of rotors building. Then distance. Then silence again. Inside the surgical wing, the red light above the operating room remained on. Colonel Harris stood alone at the far end of the corridor. Not dismissed. Not removed. Just standing. The hallway had cleared. Agents were gone. Senior staff had returned to their stations. The Navy commander in khakis had left without comment. What remained was fluorescent light and the faint antiseptic smell of a hospital settling back into routine. Harris adjusted his sleeves. They were still perfectly aligned. But something in his posture had changed. Less rigid. More deliberate. The surgical doors opened quietly. The lieutenant colonel surgeon stepped out first, removing his mask. "Internal bleed controlled," he said. "He'll make it." The words carried relief without celebration. Harris nodded once. "Good work." The surgeon hesitated. Then added, "Her call saved him." No accusation. No triumph. Just fact. Harris held the surgeon's gaze for a second longer than necessary. "I'm aware." Inside the OR, Lieutenant Carter was finishing post-op coordination. She removed her gloves, disposed of them properly, and began documenting the timeline with precise timestamps. No flourish. No lingering. Professional. When she stepped into the corridor, she paused briefly as she saw Harris waiting. Neither spoke immediately. The hallway was empty now. No audience. No agents. No president. Just two officers in a military hospital. "At ease," Harris said quietly. She relaxed her stance slightly. "Sir." He studied her for a long moment. "You invoked Directive 7. "Yes, sir." "You could have identified it immediately." "Yes, sir." "You chose not to." A beat. "Yes, sir." "Why?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Because the patient didn't need a constitutional lesson. He needed blood." The fluorescent lights hummed softly above them. Harris exhaled through his nose. "You understand the position that put me in?" "Yes, sir." "You understand how it looked?" "Yes, sir." Another silence. Different from the earlier ones. Less sharp. "I will be filing a report," Harris said. "Yes, sir." "It will reflect that you exercised lawful executive authority under classified directive." "Yes, sir." "It will also reflect that you did so without briefing installation command." That one hung between them. "Yes, sir," she repeated. No defense. No argument. Just acknowledgement. Harris nodded slowly. "That gap," he said carefully, "cannot happen again." "No, sir. I don't care what level of clearance you operate under. This facility functions on coordination." "Yes, sir." He watched her face. There was no resentment there. No smugness. Just calm acceptance. "I misread you," he said finally. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply true. "You assessed based on available information," she replied. He almost smiled at that. Almost. "Dismissed," he said. She turned to leave, then paused. "Sir." He looked up. "Thank you for allowing surgical override." He didn't answer immediately. "That wasn't charity," he said. "That was data." "Yes, sir." She walked down the corridor toward post-operative recovery. Her steps were steady. Measured. The same pace she'd kept all day. In the administrative wing, Harris entered his office and closed the door. He removed his cover and set it carefully on the desk. Then he sat. Not heavily. Just slower than usual. The after-action report terminal glowed in front of him. He began typing. No defensiveness. No embellishment. Timeline. Orders issued. Medical outcome. Executive intervention. He paused briefly over one line. Lieutenant Carter demonstrated appropriate judgment under time-sensitive conditions. He read it once. Left it. Across the hospital, word had already spread, but not loudly. There were no exaggerated stories. No heroic retellings. Just quiet adjustments in behavior. Junior nurses straightened a little faster when Carter entered a room. Not out of fear. Out of recognition. The surgeon sought her input directly during evening rounds. "Your pressure thresholds," he asked without irony. 80 minimum overnight, she replied. "Yes, ma'am." No one commented on the title. The Navy commander returned briefly before dusk. He found her reviewing charts. "Directive 7 remains active," he said quietly. "For now," she replied. He nodded once. "Good work." "Thank you, sir." He left. No handshake. No ceremony. Just acknowledgement. As evening settled over Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, the hospital resumed its disciplined rhythm. Shift changes. Chart updates. Quiet footsteps in long corridors. Colonel Harris exited his office just before 2100. He passed the recovery ward and paused at the window. Inside, the captain lay stable. Monitors steady. Breathing assisted but strong. Carter stood near the foot of the bed, reviewing vitals with a night nurse. No spotlight. No agents. Just work. Harris watched for a moment. Then he stepped inside. The night nurse snapped to attention. "At ease," Harris said. He looked at Carter. "Status. Stable. Responsive to stimuli. We'll reduce sedation gradually." He nodded. "Very good." He turned to leave, then stopped. Without looking back, he said, "Lieutenant." "Yes, sir. Next time you see something I don't, brief me faster." A slight pause. "Yes, sir." He left. The consequences weren't dramatic. No demotions. No public reprimands. But the shift was permanent. In that building, authority would still wear rank. But respect would now include the quiet nurse who had stood her ground. And everyone knew it. For ordinary again. The hospital was quieter after midnight. Not silent. Hospitals never were. But quieter. The corridors of Walter Reed National Military Medical Center carried a different kind of sound at that hour, soft rubber soles against polished floors, distant monitor tones. The low murmur of nurses handing off patients under fluorescent light that never truly dimmed. Lieutenant Amelia Carter stood alone at the recovery window. The captain lay inside, breathing steady now. Machines assisted, but no longer fought. His color had returned. His pulse held firm above 80. He would live. That was the only outcome she had cared about. She didn't replay the confrontation in her mind. Didn't rehearse the president's handshake. Didn't linger on the moment a colonel had been forced to step aside. She reviewed numbers instead. Hemoglobin levels. Drain output. Sedation schedule. Practical things. Behind her, footsteps approached and stopped. Colonel Harris. He didn't announce himself. He stood beside her, hands clasped loosely behind his back. For a long moment, neither spoke. Through the glass, the night nurse adjusted the captain's blanket with quiet precision. "He asked for you," Harris said finally. Carter didn't look away from the patient. "He's disoriented." "Not when he said your name." A pause. "He's alive," she replied. "That's not what I meant." She turned then. His expression was different in the pale light. Less rigid. Less certain. "I've commanded combat hospitals overseas," Harris said quietly. "I've made decisions with less information than I had today." "Yes, sir. And I've been wrong before." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't an apology dressed in ceremony. Just acknowledgement. She nodded once. "Authority carries weight," he continued. "It's easy to mistake that weight for clarity." She didn't answer. Because there was nothing to correct. They stood there for another few seconds, watching the steady rise and fall of the captain's chest. Outside, somewhere beyond the dark skyline, the lights of Washington flickered in the distance. The president had already returned to the White House. The agents had dispersed. The helicopter had vanished into night. And yet the weight of that moment still lingered in the building, not as spectacle, but as recalibration. By morning, the story would not be told loudly. No press release would describe the confrontation. No official statement would mention a nurse standing her ground in a trauma bay. Military institutions did not dramatize internal correction. They absorbed it. They adjusted. And they moved forward. At 0430, Carter completed her final chart update before shift change. She wrote clinically, "Stabilization achieved following delayed transport decision." Nothing about executive authority. Nothing about confrontation. Facts only. Across the facility, junior officers moved differently now. Not out of fear. Not out of awe. But with awareness. They had witnessed something rare. Not a display of power, but a redefinition of it. Authority had entered that corridor wearing a colonel's insignia. It had left wearing something else entirely. Not higher rank. Not louder voice. Just certainty backed by responsibility. Later that morning, the captain regained partial consciousness. Carter was present when his eyes opened fully. He focused slowly. Recognition came in fragments. "You held them," he murmured weakly. She adjusted his oxygen line. "I held the line," she corrected quietly. His lips twitched faintly at that. President came. "Yes." A faint breath that might have been a laugh. "He worries too much." She didn't respond. He studied her face for a long second. "You didn't tell them?" "No." "Why?" "Because it wasn't about them." His eyes closed again, exhaustion overtaking him. Before sleep claimed him, he whispered one more sentence. "Good." In his office, Harris finalized his report. He read it twice. Deleted nothing. Added nothing unnecessary. When he reached the section describing executive intervention, he paused. Then he typed, "Command authority must be exercised with humility when intersecting with specialized directives beyond installation scope." It was formal language. Measured. But it carried weight. He signed the report and forwarded it up the chain. There would be review. There always was. But he no longer felt defensive. Only corrected. The hospital resumed its rhythm fully by afternoon. Rounds. Consults. Briefings. Carter moved through them all without ceremony. She did not seek out Harris. He did not summon her. When they crossed paths in a corridor, they exchanged a simple nod. Professional. Balanced. Respect recalibrated, not broken. One of the junior nurses approached Carter during lunch. "Ma'am, how did you stay so calm?" Carter considered the question, then answered honestly. "Because the patient didn't have time for anything else." No speech about courage. No lecture on authority. Just priority. That answer traveled quietly through the staff faster than any dramatic retelling could have. By the end of the week, nothing outwardly had changed. Carter was still a lieutenant. Harris was still a colonel. The chain of command remained intact. But something subtle had shifted. Orders were delivered with a fraction more listening. Questions were asked a fraction earlier. And when Carter spoke in trauma bays after that night, no one mistook silence for lack of authority. On Sunday evening, Harris stood once more at the recovery window. The captain was sitting up now, pale but steady, speaking quietly with a visiting officer. Carter reviewed discharge projections at the foot of the bed. Harris watched for a moment. Then he stepped inside. The captain looked up and attempted a formal nod. "Colonel." "At ease," Harris said. He turned to Carter. "Lieutenant." "Sir." A brief silence. Then Harris addressed the captain. "You were fortunate." The captain's gaze shifted briefly to Carter. "I was." Harris followed that glance. And for the first time, there was no tension in it. Only recognition. As Harris turned to leave, he paused near the doorway. Without looking back, he said, "Lieutenant Carter." "Yes, sir. Next time, brief me before the helicopter." There was the faintest hint of dry acknowledgement in his tone. "Yes, sir." He left. The captain exhaled slowly. "He learns fast," he murmured. Carter adjusted the 4 rate slightly. "He leads fast," she replied. That night, as the hospital lights dimmed to their lowest operational level, Carter stepped outside for the first time in days. The air was cool. Still. Above her, the rooftop where the helicopter had landed looked no different than before. No scorch marks. No visible sign that executive power had touched down there. Institutions rarely show where they bend. They simply endure. She stood there for a moment, hands resting lightly at her sides. Not proud, not reflective, just steady. Power had walked down that corridor in polished shoes. Authority had spoken in calm, measured sentences. And in the end, none of it had mattered more than a transfusion started 30 seconds earlier than ordered. That was the lesson. Rank commands. Authority directs. But responsibility decides. Inside the building behind her, monitors continued their steady rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. The sound wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was ordinary. And that was the point. Because in places like this, under fluorescent lights and quiet ceilings, respect is not earned by volume or insignia. It is earned in the seconds no one applauds. In the decisions made before anyone important arrives. In the willingness to stand still when pressure demands motion. Lieutenant Carter turned and walked back inside. Her badge rested against her chest. Her rank unchanged. Her posture the same as it had been before the helicopter ever touched down. Authority, she knew, was visible. Responsibility was not. And when the two collide, only one keeps someone alive. The corridor lights hummed softly as she disappeared down the hall. And the hospital, steady and disciplined, kept breathing.